So, Chapter 12 of Modulo has officially leaked, and it is a big one. Not only did this chapter take time to answer some of the biggest lingering questions that the ending of JJK left us with, but also it addressed some long, well, I guess relative to how long Modulo has been around, standing theories about the possible connection between cursed spirits and Kalyans. But more than anything else, this chapter might have also kicked off the war between Cimmerians and humanity, with the possible death of a key character to the Modulo timeline. All that is to say is that Chapter 12 is packed with highly important events. So whether you're a fan of Modulo or a fan of JJK looking for answers that the manga did not give us, boy oh boy, does Chapter 12 have something for everybody. So with that said, with no further ado, let's get directly into Chapter 12 of Modulo Explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for one additional Nick video every single week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're on to Rock Lee versus Gaara. So, Chapter 12 kind of picks up where Chapter 11 left off. See, I know I didn't cover Chapter 11, and that's because I didn't really want to make a video that was almost entirely about making takoyaki, but basically the footnotes from Chapter 11 is that the Cimmerians and humanity got together to have a takoyaki party. Dabura maybe fell in love with a human woman, and an elderly Cimmerian who was crying from their third eye stated that humanity was killing Kalyans on Earth. And considering that Cimmerians only cry from their third eye during their birth, their death, and when Kalyans are killed, this claim that humanity was killing Kalyans on Earth made a fair amount of sense, because otherwise why would the Cimmerians be crying? And thus Chapter 11 left us with a cliffhanger that there was a possible war about to unfurl between humanity and the Cimmerians. And thus Chapter 12 picks up where Chapter 11 left off, with Jaburama and Cross talking to Mino and Usami about the idea that humanity was slaying Kalyans. However, Usami assures Jaburama and Cross that there's no way that humanity could be killing Kalyans because Kalyans don't exist on Earth. However, Jaburama confirms that tears have been falling from the Cimmerians' third eyes, and that these Cimmerians assert that they saw Kalyans being killed in Tokyo. And this catches Usami off guard. Because, and I'm sure the majority of you probably didn't remember this, but Usami, Mino, and the rest of humanity purposely did not tell the Cimmerians about cursed spirits. Information is an asset, and as Cimmerians have the ability to speak English, but humans don't have the ability to speak Cimmerian, humanity was falling behind in the arms race. I guess they're technically speaking Japanese, but you get what I'm saying. And thus Usami made the executive decision to not tell the Cimmerians about cursed spirits. But now that the Cimmerians have snuck into Tokyo, they've seen cursed spirits, and they've seen cursed spirits exorcised. We then cut away from this moment to go check in with Team Usami, that is Yuka, Tsurugi, and Maru, and Yuka and Tsurugi are giving Maru a rundown on why cursed spirits only manifest in Tokyo, telling Maru that when the Culling Games made the existence of cursed spirits public information to everybody, the government lied and said, well, cursed spirits only appear in Tokyo, and thus in that moment, humanity abandoned Tokyo. And it's at this moment that we get some really interesting exposition. See, because while the ending of JJK did show us that Tokyo was pretty much all but abandoned after the Culling Games, we didn't know as to whether or not people had ever moved back in. And while Modulo already told us that cursed spirits only manifest in Tokyo, apparently the reason that cursed spirits only manifest in Tokyo is because Japan specifically outlets all of the countrywide cursed energy through Tokyo, where nobody goes. And thus by outletting all of the cursed energy of the country through Tokyo, the government effectively made their lie the truth, as now excessive outletting of cursed energy only exists in Tokyo, and therefore cursed spirits only manifest in Tokyo. However, Yuka tells Maru that the chance of a cursed spirit manifesting outside of Tokyo is technically not zero, which is why, and it's at this point that she pulls out a protective ward and places it on a rock that seems as though it's been covered in a litany of much, much older protective wards. It's so important to maintain, even in cities like Kyoto, these protective wards and shrines. Now, while this might seem like a relatively minor moment, but essentially what Yuka is telling us here is how Japan has been maintaining Tengen's barriers without Tengen. See, for those of you who don't remember, Tengen was the person who Riko Amanai was supposed to fuse with so that Tengen could continue being immortal and maintaining all of the highly important Jujutsu barriers around Japan. However, since Tengen is captured by Kenjaku and then absorbed by Sukuna, Tengen dies, and therefore at the end of JJK, we see Tengen's remains are barely able to keep all of the barriers around Japan maintained. And therefore it appears now in the far-off future, sorcerers and strategically placed shrines and protective wards are now what maintain the protective massive barriers all around Japan, confirming to us that Japan's barriers are not only still up, but now being maintained by all of the sorcerers in the country. Tsurugi then chimes in and tells Maru that the Great Purification is also happening right now, which according to Yuka is a regularly scheduled mass cleansing of cursed spirits inside of Tokyo to make sure that they don't spill outwards, kind of like a culling of the herd. However, during this Great Purification, sometimes the protective wards tend to destabilize, so while the Great Purification is ongoing, it's important for sorcerers who aren't currently fighting in Japan to go to the protective wards and make sure they're stable. Now, this responsibility usually falls into the lap of students who are rarely called in to the Great Purification because the strength of cursed spirits in Tokyo is rather unpredictable. However, the current state of Tokyo is then revealed to us in a gorgeous double spread, as we see that Tokyo is now referred to as the realm of the inhuman, filled to the brim with gigantic and grotesque cursed spirits who are able to run around the ghost city for the majority of the year. We then cut to two sorcerers, one of which who was on the Jujutsu Council, the guy with the fade who was battling against Usami, mandating that they had to fight against the Sumerians, and the two of them are exercising cursed spirits while arguing about the points value that each and every single one of these cursed spirits they kill holds. They're competing with each other to see who can kill more cursed spirits, and as the two of them duck into a building to find more cursed spirits to kill, they notice a bunch of bats on the ceiling and what appear to be blood-streaked hand marks that lead up towards a door, and thus they feel as though they're being pulled towards the door, or something has been pulled towards the door, and thus they have to walk upstairs and figure out what's above them. But as they open the door, they hear somebody saying, "Good boy, you've had it rough, haven't you? Where'd you even come from?" And it's at this moment that they see Osuke holding the face of a cursed spirit that's seemingly trying to eat him. But as Osuke is looking at the two sorcerers, Osuke doesn't see that the cursed spirit behind him has its mouth open wide, presumably about to bite off Osuke's head. And thus we flash back to Usami and Mino, who are relaying the news that cursed spirits in Kalyan look very alike. However, apparently, according to the Sumerians, the Kalyan have physical bodies, meaning that cursed spirits are not Kalyans and Kalyans are not cursed spirits, and rather Kalyans seem to be physical life forms that take on the exact appearance of cursed spirits, and therefore cursed spirits are spiritual entities that resemble Kalyans almost identically. And thus, because of the possibility for confusion, Usami calls off the Great Purification immediately. Now, this is all relatively important because by far and away the most prominent theory I've been getting emailed to me recently is people believing that the Kalyans are cursed spirits and vice versa. This explains why the Kalyans are immortal, why they seemed so powerful, why the Sumerians, or specifically the Lunar tribe, believe that the Kalyans were the source of their Jujutsu-like abilities, and it would also explain why the Kalyans came in literally all shapes and forms. However, it's now been revealed that Kalyans are not cursed spirits, they just resemble each other, and while there's probably still more meat on that bone that we don't know yet, for the moment we can rather conclusively say that a Kalyan is not a cursed spirit and a cursed spirit is not a Kalyan. They just look alike. Now, as to why they look indistinguishable, I'm sure we'll learn eventually. Anyways, Usami and Mino make their way to Tokyo immediately, and they're accompanied by Cross and Jabarama, after which we once again cut back to Team Usami, where Yuka and Tsurugi are explaining to Maru that swapping out protective tags on these protective wards at shrines or high up on mountains is relatively easy. However, sometimes when a cursed object is used as the center of this protective ward, sorcerers have to keep an eye on it, because the nature of a cursed object can change over time. A charm meant to ward off evil can actually end up attracting it in the end. The sorcerers, while maintaining these protective wards, also have to judge the nature of the cursed object that's operating as this protective ward. While all three of them are having this conversation, Yuka and Tsurugi notice that Maru appears to be having a good time, and thus together they look at him and say, "You seem like you're having fun." And Maru lets them know that while he is taking the mission seriously, he just finds it endearing that amongst humans, helping other humans out is something that you can choose to do, not something you're born to do. Because apparently amongst the Lumerians, you're either born as a warrior or not. And this process is conducted by babies being brought to the village's Kalyan, at which point that Kalyan denotes as to whether or not that baby is a warrior or not. Which kind of ties into the idea that the Lunar tribe hasn't had a lot of opportunities to choose their paths in life. They're born either a warrior or not. They were forced out of their lands by the Diskunte and then forced off the planet by the Diskunte. And now some of them are hoping that humanity will let them live alongside them, while others are demanding that they finally step up and make a choice of their own. However, that choice is war. We then cut back to Jabarama, Cross, Usami, and Mino, who have made it to Tokyo. They used the Sumerian spaceship to get there faster. However, once they get there, they realize they're too late, as a battle is already unfolding between the Sumerians and the two sorcerers who are in Tokyo, purifying what the Sumerians believe to be Kalyans. And thus Usami removes his glove and gets ready to use his cursed speech. We then see the sorcerer, whose name is reintroduced as Yakumaru, landing on the ground after being blown out of a building, presumably by the Cimmerians, as he calls in, presumably to other sorcerers in the area, that the Great Purification was obstructed by the Cimmerians and that all sorcerer groups need to regroup. We then see that Yakumaru is being hounded by a group of Cimmerian soldiers, who all have tears running down their third eye. And it appears as though the reason that they all have tears running down their third eye is because of all the cursed spirits that Yakumaru and his companion sorcerer have been killing. And thus he grits his teeth and looks at this group of warriors and says, "You're the one who struck first," as he ups the blicky at them. Yeah, I don't know, he's got like a cursed tool that's a gun that he holds sideways. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with it. However, before he's able to live out every American cop's wet dream of blowing away a peaceful protest of what he believes to be illegal aliens, Usami steps in and lets him know that the Great Purification is canceled. Now this pisses off Yakumura, but Usami lets him know that they were never briefed on the existence of cursed spirits, continuing on that they willfully withheld information from the Cimmerians, and the withholding of that information is the reason that we're having this misunderstanding right now. And therefore we as humans have to acknowledge our fault in this moment. You know, the mature and emotionally balanced thing to do. But then Yakumaru screams at Usami and says, "How does any of this stop the Great Purification?" At which point Usami lets him know that the Cimmerians believe the cursed spirits to be their religious figures, the Kalyan. Now while this is going on, Cross is trying to rationalize with Oski, telling him that what they're destroying are cursed spirits, not Kalyans. Oski points at his third eye, which is filled with tears, and says, "Look at this, they're clearly Kalyans." But Cross lets him know that if those were actually Kalyans, the strain on his brain would be much worse than it currently is, as it's stated that when a Lumer tribesman has tears flowing from the third eye, the strain can be enough to kill them. On top of that, Cross directs his attention to a cursed spirit corpse just as it begins to vanish, because when a cursed spirit is exorcised, it doesn't leave a body behind. And thus Cross lets Oski know that cursed spirits are the collective unconscious bad thoughts of the Japanese public, referring to them as the Japanese people's unconscious Raroka, or what the Cimmerians basically call cursed energy. But still, Oski presses on, saying, "But you heard their voices, right?" But Cross begs with him to stop and to see the rationality here. And thus cooler heads prevail as Jaburama apologizes to Usami and Yakumura, and Usami apologizes back to him. Jaburama apologizes for the Cimmerians disembarking from their ship without permission, and Usami apologizes for not telling the Cimmerians about cursed spirits. However, both Yakumaru and Oski are looking at these two representatives apologizing to each other and asking the same question: why are you apologizing to them? The two of them then agree to take a break and meet again shortly. However, it's at this moment that Cross begins to reach into his tunic, something that Yakumaru sees and does not like. However, before we can see what Yakumaru does, we flash back to Team Usami, who are still maintaining the protective wards all around the Kyoto area. And even though they're done, Maru complains about how much work they made him do today, because apparently all of the protective wards and shrines are either real low down or on top of mountains or at religious areas. And thus there's a lot of climbing involved in maintaining Japan's barriers. And to this point, the Yukin Tsurugi lament Maru, talking about how sorcerers are almost always understaffed, and how that could be potentially fixed if, hypothetically, the Cimmerians helped them out. Which makes Maru really happy, as he realizes that not only he, but also all of the Cimmerians can be helpful on Earth. And thus, with a hard day of work done, the three of them all head off in their individual directions, all with smiles on their faces as they're excited to tell their respective parties about the prospects of humans and Cimmerians working together to better Japan. But it's at this moment that we cut back to Tokyo, where two gunshots ring out, and we see that Yakumaru has hit Cross with a two-piece. One shot in the area of where Cross's heart would be, and the other in the area of where his liver would be. For all intents and purposes, fatal shots. Now this elicits a surprised reaction from Oski and Usami, who scream out Cross, or "Why did you shoot?" Yakumaru starts screaming about how Cross reached for his weapon and how he made the first move. He forced him to shoot. And Oski and all of the warriors begin screaming about how they'll massacre all of the sorcerers, while Jaburama tries to stop them. And it seems as though conflict between the Cimmerians and the humans is all but guaranteed, as the representatives of both humanity and the Cimmerians aren't able to stop their warriors, to the point where even Usami looks as though he's ready to use his cursed speech. However, every single one of them is stopped directly in their tracks as a voice rings out a simple question: what are you doing? And it's at this point that it's revealed that walking towards them slowly is Dabura, with the last sign off from this chapter being from the narrator saying, a special grade arrives. And thus it feels as though war is on the horizon between humanity and the Cimmerians. A bubbling tension that is finally boiled over. An undeniable conflict that could be devastating for either the Loomer tribe or all of Japan. And at the center of it, 3 kids all just trying to get their respective peoples to get along. Now, if I'm being real with you, I'm not all that surprised. We're on chapter 12, and there's gonna be 30 plus chapters to this story. You can only edge the concept of war for so much longer. On top of this, considering the fact that Yuji is still alive, kicking and apparently still very strong, and a battle between Yuji and Dabura just kind of has to happen. Yuji's probably the only person in Japan right now who's able to battle against special grade. Everybody wants to see the MC again. Everybody wants to know what's going on with Yuji, what's going on with his connection to Mahito. Everybody wants to see the full power of Dabura. Gege is best known for his action sequences, and therefore, while the political thriller aspect of the story has been fun, it's time we get into a war that's slowly but surely solved through the power of friendship, and then eventually by the end of the story, Cimmerians and the Japanese people are able to live in harmony. But before we get into harmony, we gotta get into conflict, and it seems as though we're finally doing exactly that. So you could say, I'm pretty stoked about this chapter, but how do you guys feel about it? Do you think Cross is gonna be able to survive his 2 gunshot wounds? Do you believe that Yuka might give up her life for Cross because she's already dying of a terminal illness? And do you believe that war is on the horizon? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I also know there's probably going to be some plot line introduced that Dabura's maybe about to finish off Yuji, or maybe Dabura's been defeated and he's like, oh, well, you know, humanity's not all that bad because there's that really cute baker girl, and I think I'll just shack up with her as the 7-foot man that she's always wanted with mega earlobes. I don't know. There's a lot of things going on. I'm very excited for all of them.